Welcome, friends. In this episode, we will hear the story of Adrian and the alien commander Arya. Buckle up and get ready for takeoff. Sci-Fi Traveler is about to begin. The armory of the Ashen Vow was not built for quiet thoughts, which was a mercy, because nobody aboard had enjoyed one in weeks. It was a cathedral of noise, a vaulted iron belly where overhead welders spat blue rain, where hammers found anvils with the regularity of a heartbeat, and where 300 alien soldiers checked their gear with the grim cheer of people who have made peace with the arithmetic of a losing war. Sparks fell like the ghosts of fireflies. Somewhere a coolant line hissed a complaint no one had time to answer. And into all of it, through the great blast doors that groaned open on tired hydraulics, came Commander Arya, holding her battle plate in both hands as though it were a live thing that might bite. The noise did not stop. The noise never stopped. But it thinned, the way a crowd thins when everyone remembers all at once that they have somewhere else to be. Arya was, even now, a striking woman, tall, scar-lined, her face lit fierce and red by the forge glow, and by a fury that had been building since she'd found her armor sitting on its rack that morning like an accusation. The only thing about her that marked her as something other than human were her ears, long and pointed and elegant, currently flattened back against her dark hair in the universal, wordless signal that someone was about to have a very bad day. She lifted the battle plate above her head. It caught the light. It caught it beautifully, every crack sealed, every seam rewelded, every rivet seated so cleanly that the metal looked less repaired than reborn. "WHO," she roared, and the word hit the steel walls and came back with interest. "Repaired this armor." The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a soldier swallow. Several did, because everyone knew the story. Yesterday, the Vow's *3 finest engineers had stood over that same plate and pronounced it dead with the solemnity of physicians. The alloy was fatigued past tolerance, they'd said. The lattice was compromised. It was, in the technical language of people who did not want to be blamed, scrap with sentimental value. And a warrior's plate was sacred, worn in every battle, bled on, wept on, buried with its owner when the owner ran out of battles. To touch another warrior's armor uninvited was not quite a crime. It was worse. It was rude. Arya's gaze swept the ranks like a searchlight looking for something to burn. "I will ask one more time." "That be me." The voice came from the back. It was not loud. If anything, it was apologetic, the tone of a man raising his hand in a class where he already suspects the answer is going to get him killed. The ranks parted quickly, the way people step back from a puddle or a grenade, and out of them stepped a human. The only human aboard. His name was Adrian, and at that moment he was deeply, philosophically regretting every decision that had delivered him to this spot, up to and including being born. He was lean and grease-smudged, and had the specific exhausted look of a man who had been awake for the better part of 2 nights. He wiped his palms on his coveralls, which accomplished nothing except transferring grime from one place to a slightly different place. And he met the commander's blazing eyes with the steadiness of someone who has decided that if he's going to be executed, he'd at least like to do it with good posture. "I couldn't sleep," Adrian said, into a silence you could have bottled and sold. And it seemed a shame. Arya stared at him. 300 soldiers stared at him. He got the distinct impression the welders were staring at him too. "Shame," she repeated. "The armor. It was good armor." He gestured at it, then thought better of gesturing, then didn't know what to do with the hand, so he just sort of let it hang there like an unwelcome guest. "The engineers said it was finished, but they were looking at what was broken. I figured somebody ought to look at what was still holding." He cleared his throat. "So I did, all night. There's coffee involved in the story, but I don't think it changes the outcome." For a long, dangerous moment, Commander Arya said nothing at all. Her knuckles were pale where they gripped the plate, the impossible, flawless, resurrected plate that 4 hardened experts had condemned, and one sleepless human had quietly refused to give up on. Her ears, which had been pinned back in wrath, shifted the smallest fraction forward. It was the first honest question her face had asked in months. She looked at the armor. She looked at the man. And something in the disciplined fortress of her heart, something that had not moved in a very long time, made a sound very much like a hairline crack. Which was, of course, precisely when the proximity klaxon began to scream. The klaxon had a particular talent for ruining moments, and it exercised that talent now with the enthusiasm of a thing that has never once been thanked. Its wail scaled up through the armory until every soldier's hand went to their weapon by reflex, and the fragile, strange hush between Arya and Adrian shattered like a dropped glass. She turned from him without a word, because a commander does not get to finish sentences during a proximity alert. That is simply not a benefit the job provides, and strode toward the wall-mounted comm panel, her boots ringing on the deck plates. "Bridge, report." Her voice had gone from furnace hot to Arctic in under a second, which Adrian filed away as one of the more terrifying transitions he had ever personally witnessed. The panel crackled. "Contacts, Commander. A lot of them. They came out from behind the moon like they'd been waiting." A pause, and then, in the tone of a man delivering news he knows will not improve his afternoon. "Because they were, ma'am. Waiting. It's a fleet." Arya closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Adrian got the sense it was the only second she intended to spend on despair, and that she was budgeting it carefully. "Numbers," she said. "Enough that counting feels pessimistic." The armory had gone very still around them. 300 warriors who had all done the same brutal arithmetic and arrived at the same unlovely sum. Arya opened her eyes. Whatever had cracked in her a moment ago, she'd apparently welded it shut again with the same efficiency Adrian had applied to her breastplate. Because when she turned to face her troops, she was pure command, spine straight, ears sharp forward, every scar on her face suddenly looking less like an old wound and more like a promise. "You heard him," she said, and she did not raise her voice, which was somehow worse than the roar had been. "Assemble, full plate. We do not have the luxury of being outnumbered quietly." There was a rumble of grim agreement, the sound of a great many people picking up a great many heavy things, and the armory surged back into clanging motion. Adrian, uncertain whether he had been forgiven, court-martialed, or simply forgotten in the shuffle, did the only sensible thing and started to melt backward into the crowd. Human. He froze. He had a whole first name, a good one, but he was beginning to suspect he'd be answering to human for the foreseeable future, assuming the future stayed foreseeable at all. Arya crossed to him in 3 strides, still holding the resurrected battle plate, and up close she was even more of a problem than she'd been at a distance. The forgelight caught the hard line of her jaw and the fierce red of her face, and the ridiculous, undeniable fact that she was beautiful, in the specific way that a drawn blade is beautiful, which is to say you admired it and kept your hands well clear. "Adrian," he offered. "It's Adrian actually, if we're. I know your name." She hadn't, he was fairly sure, 30 seconds ago, but he decided this was not the hill. She held the armor up between them like evidence at a trial. "The engineer said this was dead." "They're good engineers, they were just wrong." One of her eyebrows rose a precise, skeptical increment. "You say that with remarkable calm for a man who has just contradicted 3 specialists and touched a commander's sacred gear." "To be fair, ma'am, I'm about to be shot at by a whole fleet either way. It rather takes the sting out of the smaller offenses." He shrugged, and the shrug was so purely, stubbornly human that Arya felt the corner of her mouth do something treasonous and had to physically stop it. "If I'm going to be in trouble, I'd rather be in trouble for something that worked." For a heartbeat she just looked at him, at the grease and the exhaustion, and the steady, unbothered eyes of a man who had stayed up all night saving a stranger's armor for no reason, but that he couldn't stand to watch it be thrown away. She had commanded soldiers her whole life. She knew every flavor of courage there was, the loud kind, the desperate kind, the kind that came prepackaged with a death wish. This was none of them. This was quieter, and she did not have a name for it, and she found that its absence bothered her more than an enemy fleet did. "You'll fight with my squad," she said abruptly. Adrian blinked. "I'm a mechanic. I fix the things that shoot. I am not, historically, one of the things that shoots." "Then you will keep the things that shoot working while people are actively trying to break them, which is precisely the skill I require." She pressed the battle plate into his hands, warm from her grip, and heavier than it looked, the weight of every fight it had already survived. "Since you are so fond of this armor, carry it to my quarters. Then arm yourself." She was already turning away, already 10 decisions ahead of him, but she paused at the very edge of leaving and glanced back over one shoulder. And for just a moment the commander was gone, and something else looked out through her eyes, wary and unwilling and almost warm. "And Adrian," she said, "thank you." Then she was gone into the churning dark of the mustering deck, and Adrian stood alone in the sparks holding her armor, wearing the profoundly unhelpful expression of a man who has just realized the war is not going to be the most dangerous thing aboard this ship. "The thing nobody tells you about a boarding action," Adrian reflected, wedged behind a bulkhead while the corridor filled with the specific hell light of weapons fire, "is how loud the quiet parts are. The screaming and the shooting, sure, you expected those. But it was the intervals, the 2-second lulls where you could hear your own heartbeat and someone else's magazine clicking home, and the soft apologetic hiss of a hull breach 3 decks up, that really got into a man's nerves and set up housekeeping. The enemy had come across on grapple lines, hard and fast, punching their way into the *Ashen Vow's flank, with the confidence of a fleet that had already done the math. Now they were in the corridors, and the fight had broken into the ugly, close, personal kind, the kind where you could see the face of the thing trying to end you. Arya's squad held the aft junction like a cork in a bottle, and Arya herself was at the front of it, moving through the chaos with a lethal economy that Adrian found genuinely educational to watch, right up until a plasma bolt reminded him he was also supposed to be doing a job. "Kale, your left brace is seized," he shouted, because one of Arya's warriors had stopped mid-swing with the panicked hitch of a man whose powered gauntlet had just decided to become a very expensive paperweight. Adrian slid across the deck on his knees, a maneuver that felt heroic and looked, he was sure, deeply stupid, got both hands on the gauntlet's housing, and hit the manual release with the heel of his palm. The joint unlocked with a grateful clunk. "There, try not to break it again, I only have the 2 hands." "You talk too much, human," Kale growled, and drove the freed gauntlet into an oncoming boarder with a sound like a car meeting a wall. "I've been told, by better people than you even." From 10 feet away, mid-parry, Arya heard the exchange and felt the corner of her mouth twitch with that same treasonous impulse from the armory. It was the most inconvenient thing about the man. She was deciding, not that he was brave, she had brave in abundance, but that he was funny. Here, now, in the exact circumstances where funny had no business existing. Her warriors did not joke in battle. Her warriors sang death hymns and roared their ancestors' names. And yet here was this greasy human cracking wise with a plasma burn on his sleeve, and she watched Kale, grim, humorless Kale, who had not smiled since the second campaign, bark out something that was very nearly a laugh and fight harder for it. She filed that away too. She was accumulating quite a file. "Adrian," she called, "the junction seal, can you close it?" He followed her gaze to the great pressure door hanging half open above the breach, its actuator sparking uselessly. If it shut, the boarders already through were trapped on this side with a very annoyed squad, and no more would follow. If it didn't, the Vow bled soldiers all night. "I can close it," he called back, scrambling toward the control housing, "but I'm going to need about 40 seconds where nobody's shooting me, and I recognize that's a big ask given current management." "You'll have 30. That's less Commander. That's fewer seconds than I asked for. Then work faster." And she moved, she and the whole squad flowing forward into the breach like a closing fist, putting their bodies between Adrian and everything that wanted to end him. And Adrian stopped arguing because arguing with that was like arguing with weather. He tore the housing off. Inside was a rat's nest of scorched wiring and one hydraulic line weeping fluid, and he did the thing he did, the thing that had gotten him into all this trouble in the first place. He stopped looking at what was broken and looked at what was still holding. There, that relay, that line, bridge those two, bypass the dead actuator end. Behind him, the fight was a wall of sound, and he did not turn around, because turning around wouldn't fix the door, and the door was his whole world now. He crossed the leads. Sparks bit his fingers. The pressure seal shuddered, groaned, and began, slowly, then all at once, to grind shut, the great door coming down like a verdict, cutting off the flood of boarders mid-charge. Closed. He shouted, and turned to find the corridor a mess of downed enemies and standing allies and one commander looking directly at him. Arya was breathing hard, a spatter of someone's blood across her cheekbone, her ears sharp and high with the electric aftermath of combat. The junction was theirs. The line had held, and she crossed to him through the settling smoke, and Adrian braced for an order or a correction, or another thank you delivered like it cost her a tooth. Instead she looked at him for a moment, the exhausted, grinning, wholly ridiculous human who had just saved the aft third of her ship with a joke and a bridged relay. And she said, with a gravity that made his stomach do something complicated, "You are the strangest soldier I have ever commanded. A beat, do not let it go to your head." "Too late," he said. "It's already there, redecorating." And Arya, commander of the Ashen Vow *, veteran of 9 campaigns, terror of 2-star systems, Arya laughed. It escaped before she could arrest it, short and surprised and entirely real, and the sound of it startled her more than any boarding party had. Kale turned and stared. The whole squad turned and stared. And Arya, hearing it, felt the hairline crack in her disciplined heart travel just a little further, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, chose not to weld it shut. Between battles there is a country almost no one writes about, and Adrian was learning its geography. It was made of long hours and dimmed lights, and the low hum of a wounded ship holding itself together by willpower and duct tape, which, Adrian noted with professional approval, was in fact partly literal duct tape, because he'd applied some. The Ashen Vow had limped to the dark side of a nameless gas giant to lick its wounds, and in that borrowed stillness, the crew did the things soldiers do when no one is trying to kill them. They slept, they mourned, they mended. And in the armory most nights now, 2 people mended together. It had started as practicality. Arya's plate needed maintenance, and Adrian was, by unanimous and slightly resentful consensus, the only person aboard who now understood how his own repairs held together. So she brought the armor and he worked on it, and she stayed to watch, ostensibly to guard her sacred gear from further human liberties. That was the official story. The official story lasted about 3 nights before neither of them was pretending anymore. "You never answered me," Arya said one such night. She sat on an equipment crate with the ease of someone who had decided the armory was hers, watching him buff a seam by the light of a single work lamp. Around them the great room was empty and echoing, all its clamor gone to sleep. Why a human enlists with an alien war host? Your kind and mine were not, historically, fond of one another. "No," Adrian agreed, not looking up. "Historically we shot at each other a fair amount. And yet..." He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet was the honest kind. "My colony signed the accords late," he said, "after the fighting stopped. There wasn't much left of it by then. The war had gone through us like weather. No home to speak of, no people to speak of, just me and a very good set of tools." He turned the seam to the light, checking his work. "Your war host was hiring anyone who could hold a wrench and wouldn't run. I could hold a wrench. The running was still theoretical at that point." A small, wry smile. "I stayed because the work was honest. You break, I fix. There's a cleanness to it. I spent a lot of years watching things I loved get broken and not being able to do a single thing about it. Turns out I'll follow just about anyone who lets me do something about it. Arya said nothing for a while. She understood loss the way she understood her own hands completely and without wanting to look at it too closely. "And you?" Adrian asked, before the silence could get too heavy. "Nobody commands 9 campaigns for fun. Or do they? Is that a thing your people do recreationally? Should I be worried?" That earned him the huff of breath that passed with Arya for a laugh. "It is not recreational." She turned her gaze up to the dark vault of the ceiling where the welders hung silent. "I command because I am good at it. Because soldiers live when I am in the room and die when I am not, and once you know that about yourself, you do not get to put it down." The words came slower now. "It is a lonely thing being the one they look to. You cannot be afraid where they can see you. You cannot be tired. You cannot—" She stopped. "You cannot be a person," Adrian said quietly. Her ears flicked, startled. "Yes." She looked at him with something almost like alarm, as if he'd picked a lock she'd forgotten was on the door. "Yes, exactly that." He set the polishing cloth down. "For what it's worth, Commander, you're doing a fairly poor job of not being a person right now. You laughed at me in a firefight. That's practically a confession." "That," she said with great dignity, "was tactical. It confused the enemy." "It confused Kale. I saw his face. The man looked like he'd witnessed a religious event." And she laughed again, easier this time, less startled by the sound of her own joy. And Adrian looked at her in the low golden light, at the fierce beautiful red of her, at the scars and the sharp elegant ears and the way her guard had come down without either of them quite deciding it should, and he became aware, in the sudden helpless way one becomes aware of a change in the weather, that he was in a great deal of trouble. Arya became aware of it at the same moment, which was the trouble with them. They were both far too observant for their own good. The air between them changed, thickened, went warm and dangerous. Her gaze dropped just once to his mouth, and she caught it doing so and yanked it back up to his eyes. And Adrian watched a proud commander who had faced down whole fleets be thoroughly rooted by a single unruly feeling. "This is inconvenient," she informed him in the tone of a woman reading out a casualty report. "Deeply," he agreed. "Terrible timing, wildly unprofessional. I'm your mechanic." "You are my mechanic," she echoed, not moving away. "There's a war on," he added, also not moving away. "There is a very large war on," she confirmed, and neither of them found this argument even slightly persuasive. And the silence that followed was the loudest thing either of them had heard all week, right up until the comm panel crackled to life with the bridge officer's voice, tight as a wire. "Commander, the enemy fleet's moving. They've found us. A breath, and ma'am, they've brought the rest of them." The rest of them was a lot of them. On the bridge's great tactical display, the enemy fleet bloomed like an infection. Every red mark a ship. Every ship a hull full of people who wanted the Ashen Vow asterisk to become debris. And there were so many red marks that the display had thoughtfully clustered some of them together to avoid, Adrian assumed, causing panic. It was not working. Panic was being caused regardless. "They flanked the moon," the bridge officer was saying. "Cut our run home. We're pinned against the giant's gravity well, engines at 60% and the shield array is down." Arya finished, reading it off the board. Her voice was very calm. Adrian had learned that her voice got calmer in exact proportion to how bad things were, which meant that the flat, level serenity with which she now spoke was, frankly, terrifying. "We took a hit to the primary array during the boarding. It never came back up." She turned to the engineering officer. "Tell me." The engineer's face was the color of old ash. "The array can be rerouted through the auxiliary conduit, Commander. That would give us shields enough to survive the first volley, maybe the second. But the reroute has to be done by hand at the junction, outside the armored core." He swallowed. "In the forward maintenance shaft, which is exposed," Arya said. "The first salvo will be landing there in about 11 minutes. Anyone in that shaft when it hits will not be leaving it. And it's a 40-minute job for a full engineering team, which we don't have, because half of them are dead. A silence settled over the bridge, thick and total. Everyone did the math. Everyone arrived at the same answer, which was that there was no answer, that the ship needed a repair that couldn't be finished in the time before the thing that made the repair necessary killed whoever was doing it. It was the kind of problem that had no solution, only a price. "It's not 40 minutes, Adrian said. Every head on the bridge turned. He was standing at the back where the mechanic stood, and he was looking at the schematic with the particular stillness he got when he'd stopped seeing what was broken and started seeing what was still holding. "It's 40 minutes for a asterisk team," he went on, "because a team coordinates and double-checks and follows procedure, which is how you do it right. But you don't need it right. You need it asterisk working. One person who knows the whole system in his hands, who doesn't stop to check anyone else's work because there's no one else. That person can bridge the primary and the auxiliary in about 12. He looked up, cutting it close on the 11, but close counts when the alternative is not at all. "Adrian." Arya said his name like a warning. "I stayed up all night once for a stranger's armor," he said, and he was speaking only to her now, the rest of the bridge gone somewhere far away. "You think I won't do this for the whole ship? You will die in that shaft. Probably, but probably isn't certainly, and certainly is what happens to everyone if the shields stay down." He was already stripping off the outer layer of his coveralls, already reaching for the tool harness, moving with the awful efficiency of a man who has finished deciding. "That's the trade, Commander. That's the only trade on the table. One mechanic who's going to die anyway when the ship does. Spent a little early and a little useful." And Arya, commander of the Ashen Vow Asterisk, who had in her long career signed the death warrants of soldiers by the hundred, who had ordered friends into fire and watched them not come out and gone on commanding, because that was the job and the job did not stop for grief. Arya opened her mouth to give the order that would send him, and found that she could not. The words were right there. Go. One syllable. She had said it 1,000 times. Her whole life was built on being able to say it, on being the one who could spend a life for a ship because someone had to and because it could not cost her anything visible ever, where the soldiers could see. And she stood on her own bridge with the whole crew watching and discovered that this one life, this greasy, funny, impossible human who had laughed in a firefight and picked the lock on her closed-off heart, was the one life she could not spend. The realization arrived with the force of a hull breach. She could not order him, so she was not going to. "No," she said. Adrian paused, harness half buckled. "Commander, you are not going alone." She was already moving, already unclasping the outer plate that would never fit through a maintenance shaft, tossing it aside, and the bridge crew watched their commander do the single most unthinkable thing they had ever seen her do. The reroute is a two-person job if the second person hands the first person his tools and keeps the debris off his back and drags him out by the collar when he is too stubborn to leave. You said it yourself. One person who knows the whole system. She met his eyes, fierce and red and utterly resolved. And one person who is not going to let him do it by himself. "That's not," Adrian started. "You're the commander. You don't go into the shaft. That's the whole point of being the commander." "Then I am a poor commander today," Arya said, and grabbed a tool harness of her own. 11 minutes, Adrian. Are we going to spend them arguing, or are we going to go be difficult to kill? And Adrian looked at her, really looked. The way he looked at things he decided were worth saving, and grinned, even now, even here, with the Reaper 11 minutes out and closing. "Difficult to kill," he said. "It's the only setting I've got." The forward maintenance shaft was a coffin with opinions. It was too narrow for two people, and it had two people in it anyway, folded into the dark against a wall of scorched conduit while somewhere far too close, the ship shuddered under the first ranging shots. Adrian worked. Arya handed. That was the whole arrangement, and it turned out to be exactly enough. He'd call for a coupler and it was in his palm before he finished the word. He'd reach and she'd already moved the debris. He'd curse at a fused relay and she'd brace the panel so he could hit it harder. They did not talk much. There wasn't the air for it. But every so often, in the gaps between impacts, one of them would say something absurd. If we live through this, I'm billing you overtime. If we live through this, I'm demoting you to something with a wrench. And the other would breathe out something like a laugh, and it helped. It helped more than either of them would have admitted with time to spare. Primaries bridged, Adrian said, hands buried to the wrist in the guts of the system. Auxiliaries the problem. The conduits warped from the earlier hit. It won't seat. He was sweating, and it wasn't just the heat. I can force it, but if I force it wrong it shorts the whole array and we've spent all this for nothing. Then force it right. Thanks, deeply actionable. But he was already looking at it the way he looked at things, not at the warp, at the fit asterisk, at the one angle where the broken thing still lined up with what it was supposed to be. And he saw it, the seam that was still holding, and he set the conduit against it and he pushed. The metal screamed. His hand screamed. Above them the ship's hull rang like a struck bell as the first true salvo landed somewhere aft, close enough that the shaft filled with dust and the lights guttered, and the conduit seated with a asterisk chunk asterisk he felt in his teeth, and every dead panel in the shaft flared back to life at once. Shields, the comm crackled, half disbelieving. Shields coming up, we have the array, we have the array. What followed, Adrian only half remembered afterward. The asterisk Ashen Vow asterisk was not a graceful ship, and it did not fight a graceful battle. It fought the way its commander did, with a stubborn refusal to accept the arithmetic. The revived shields ate the first full volley meant to gut them. The engines, coaxed past 60% by a chief engineer with nothing left to lose, wrenched them out of the gravity well at an angle no sane pilot would have tried. And the enemy fleet, arranged for a killing blow against a crippled target, found itself instead firing across its own formation at a ship that would not die on schedule. It was not a clean victory. Nothing about the Vow asterisk was ever clean. But when the smoke cleared and the red marks on the tactical display had scattered and broken and finally, disbelievingly, fled asterisk, the ship was still there. Battered, bleeding atmosphere from 4 decks, but there. They pulled Adrian out of the shaft by his collar, which was fitting since he'd predicted it. Arya did the pulling. Neither of them was in any condition to be proud about it. The ringing quiet afterward was the strangest sound of all. They ended up in the armory, because of course they did, sitting against an equipment crate on the deck where they'd first shouted at each other across 300 staring soldiers, both of them filthy, singed, bleeding a little, breathing the recycled air of a ship that had earned another day. The welders hung silent overhead. Somewhere, faintly, the crew was cheering, but it hadn't reached this room yet, and neither of them was in a hurry for it to. I never did answer my own question, Arya said, after a long while. Adrian tipped his head against the crate. Which one? You've had a few. It's been a busy campaign. The first one. The one I roared loud enough to unbolt the walls. She was looking at nothing, or at the past, which is a kind of nothing. Who repaired this armor? A breath. I have thought about it on and off between things trying to kill us, and I have decided the honest answer is longer than I expected. He waited. He'd learned with her to wait. You repaired the armor, she said, but you also repaired the thing I had stopped believing could be repaired. The part of me that I had condemned, declared beyond saving, set on the rack and walked away from, because the experts agreed it was finished, and it was easier to believe them. She turned her head and looked at him then, fierce and red, and no longer bothering to armor any of it, her long ears soft and forward and entirely undefended. You looked at what was broken, and then you did the thing you do. You looked at what was still holding. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then, because he was who he was, and because a moment this large frightened him a little, he said, In my defense, I had no idea it was going to turn into a whole thing. I just couldn't stand to see good armor thrown out. I know, her mouth curved. That is precisely how I know it was real. And there, on the floor of the armory, with the ship saved and the fleet broken and the cheering finally spilling in from the corridors, Commander Arya leaned over and kissed the strangest soldier she had ever commanded. Not as a commander, and not as a warrior, but simply as a person, the one thing she had told him she was never allowed to be. Adrian kissed her back like a man who fixes things, which is to say gently and thoroughly, and with the quiet certainty of someone who had finally found the one repair he intended to make last. They did not need rank for this. They did not need speeches or ceremony or anyone's permission. They had a battered ship, a surviving crew, a war that would, inconveniently, still be there in the morning, and each other, mended and holding, in the sudden ringing quiet of a place built for noise. It was, all things considered, more than either of them had expected to keep. We've reached the end of another story. We would be very happy if you hit the like button, left your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next episode.